Okay. There is an extra credit component in that if you create a vocoder, you get 2 points of extra credit. Really, I'm interested in you experimenting with this concept. So I've created a template for you. So I've made it really, really easy for you to get the points. You just have to transfer this onto your session somehow and potentially justify its use. But what you could do is you could just go to the vocoder section on Ableton and you could download the template. And I will show you how this works. So I'll open it. I will save this really quickly. I'll call this mixing test. Okay. So the basic idea behind a vocoder is that there is essentially, you're basically applying the characteristics of your voice to a synthesized sound. That's basically what's happening. So what you have is you have this carrier signal. What a carrier signal is it's basically like the basis for the sound that you're going to be using for the sound design, right? It carries the sound. It's actually the it's like the original sound, okay? So you have this like synthesizer, for instance. Let me actually share my computer audio. Share computer sound. So you have this synthesizer, for example. What's going on here? Can you guys hear that? Yep. Okay, cool. Is it softer when I do this? Or is it the same volume?
A little bit.
Can you not hear it all now?
No, it's the same, I think.
Because I can't hear it all now. Can anyone hear anything?
I can still hear it.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah, we can hear it.
I guess you can't hear anything.
We can hear it. We can hear it.
Oh, for some reason I'm seeing. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. This is my output. So I guess if you're talking, I'm muting. Okay. I understand now. I couldn't hear you saying you could hear this because I was muting you. Okay, great. All right. So I lowered this earlier because on this new interface, for some reason the levels. For some reason, I blasted my ears really loudly, so I was really afraid that I didn't want to do that. But I guess this is for my levels, not your levels, so it should be okay. So anyway, so we have a carrier signal. This is like a nice little brassy sound. And what we could do is we could apply the characteristics of our voice on top of this to kind of morph the sound. So, to kind of get this robotic voice. So for instance, what I'll do is I will see about playing something. Testing. I always get this wrong the first time. It's humbling, but it's cool. It takes a little bit of thinking of getting that. It takes a little bit of thinking. Test. Oh, you know what? Test.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
In my experience, you have to arm both tracks.
Test. Ah, perfect. Thank you. Test. Oh, okay. Here's one other way you could do it without arming both tracks. If you leave this on input, it should still work. Test. I think on the template, I need to re-upload this. I think in the past I did arm both tracks. I think that's a good way of doing it, but you might that might be a little annoying at times because you might be in a situation where you're let's say you have another this is a good opportunity to explain this routing really quickly. So if I have this plugin, thank you for pointing that out, by the way. Let's see. I have this plugin and whoops. I have this Andromeda bass pad. That's really cool, whatever. Give me a second, let me lower it. And let's say all of a sudden I want to go to a vocoder. I want to go to my vocoder track. If I click this, I can't hear anything. Or if I have this on auto, I won't be able to hear anything. From an ergonomic standpoint, like, oh, I want to play this, play my like atmospheric thing, and then I want to like make a robotic sound with my voice. There's two ways you could do it. You could arm both of these tracks, but that's a little bit, that's like a little bit of extra work from the standpoint that like you have to click this and then you have to like hold down control and arm both of these tracks. What arming the track does is it automatically puts the monitoring on to input, which means that like when I'm playing my keyboard, sound will come into the channel, and you'll hear that sound. And so when you do that, as I'm playing my keyboard, if it's on, wait a second. If I'm on auto, and I'm not actually, yeah, if I'm on auto right now, I'm playing my keyboard, you're not seeing any level. If I arm the track for recording, you're going to see level. But if I put my track into input monitoring mode, you're also going to see level. It's important that you see level. Well, I guess if you're recording, let's say if you're recording, if I'm in auto, it should, nothing's still happening, right? So if I'm on, I need to, basically, long story short, you have to make sure that your carrier signal has signal in the channel. If you're not getting signal in the channel, there's nothing that the modulation signal can do. So like backing up, a vocoder has a carrier signal, which is this signal right here. And if I play it by itself, it sounds like this. Right? What we need to do is we need to have this signal pass into a vocoder to be modulated by the vocoder. And so in order to do that, we have to make sure that level is being put into this track, and then it's somehow being accessed through this track. And this is sort of sidechain. You're basically sidechaining the input of this track onto this track. So in order to actually hear what's happening on this track, I guess I'll go back to this, the modulator track. You go to the vocoder and you have to select an external source. You have to select the sidechain input. You have to select the source for the carrier signal. And then after that, you select the track that is the carrier signal, right? So I've called this carrier signal carrier. I could rename it and call it synth brass, right? And here, when I go to the sidechain input of the vocoder, I could actually see this synth brass track right here. And I guess the result of all of this stuff, all these shenanigans, hello, test. Hello, can you hear me okay? Let me raise my volume so I can hear myself. Test. Hello, can you hear me okay? Right?
Hey, Nakul.
Yeah.
I think part of the tricky thing is that we're hearing you through Zoom and we're hearing you through Ableton, so it's hard to really know what's being vocoded.
Oh, right. Thank you. Let me.
Try muting your Zoom audio.
Yeah.
Okay, now we can't hear you.
Can you hear me? I guess you can hear me now? Okay, cool. So I'll just have to switch between this track and this track. I hear a little bit of an echo. It's a little bit distracting, but that's okay.
Yeah, we're not getting you.
Okay, this is actually a good opportunity to leave input on for monitoring. So I can just go back to this channel without it turning off. So I'm going to go to this channel. This channel is still monitoring, which is good. So what you're seeing on this little vocoder modulation track is basically all the frequencies in my voice. And you kind of see the lower frequencies in my voice, and you see the higher frequencies in my voice. So if I sing low, oh, right? You basically see the graph move from the left to the right. Right? So it's showing you the graph of what my voice looks like in terms of the frequency content of my voice. So this is sort of like a crude approximation of what my voice looks like in terms of the frequencies at any given time. Like there's some low frequencies, there's some high frequencies, but there's a lot of energy right here, right? I can lower the bands so that, like, you know, I can see, this is my voice in like a more low resolution format. So like, ooh, it's a little harder to see the energy kind of shift to the left, but that's basically what's happening. I can increase the number of bands, and now there's more stuff going on here, right? So interesting, right? So I can increase the number of bands. This is a high resolution sort of signal, the highest resolution we have, representation of my voice. And so what the vocoder does is it basically, if this is like the characteristic of my voice, I can apply this characteristic, like I can filter the other sound like this, and I will get a sound that is reminiscent of my voice, even when I'm just playing my synthesizer. So I'm going to go back to the other track. I'm going to actually turn on the vocoder. Test, 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 test. Hello, hello. Yes, you could probably hear that this kind of sounds like me.
Hey, Nakul. What if you tried lowering the formant? Yeah, because we're getting a lot of synthesizer, but we're not getting a lot of. We're
It's
getting
really
some
hard to
vocal
make out
cord.
the words.
Yeah.
When you showed us the other day, it was really easy to tell what you were saying, but I can't tell at all what you're saying.
Maybe it's the dry wet knob.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, that sounds way better.
You probably couldn't hear anything I was just saying just now. Okay, what I was saying is, see, because of how complicated the voice is and how, like, basically the filter is changing so often, right? Like, every single nuance of my voice is very, like, if I say s versus p, p, or sh, k, 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 all of these have unique filter shapes. So it's really important that the filter transition between all of these sounds really quickly. So what was happening earlier is when I was actually, when the release is really high, it's basically not allowing the vocoder to transition. We can't hear the transitions between these different filter shapes. We're basically just hanging on one particular filter shape. So if I go back now and I turn on the,
hello, now you can hear me. It's probably crisp and clear, and it's good. But if I raise this, now
you can't hear anything because it's like completely garbled. It's like my lips can't move fast enough, and I can't articulate things correctly, right?
now I got got this kind of classic vocoder sound. Now that you can hear it, but I'm glad you told me that because I was wondering myself, but it's hard for me to hear how it's coming out. So let me lower the bands and we can kind of compare it. This may or may sound like me a little bit more, probably a little bit more now. But as I lower the bands, I'm going to start becoming really indistinguishable. So I'm going to lower the bands. Good that you can hear me just now because I was saying some really terrible stuff. No, I'm just kidding. I was just saying test, test, test. Okay, so that's the basic idea.
We're not hearing you. We're hearing little blips.
Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me know. You can hear me now, probably.
Yep.
So now this is basically going to emphasize. It's going to interesting. At 0%, the envelope is discarded. At 200%, only high peaks will be used. Okay, let's take a look at this and just compare the results as we turn the depth knob. Oh, hello. Now it looks like there's some lower frequencies in here. As I turn it up, it seems like there's more high frequencies. It seems like this is almost like a filter of sorts. And now I can hear more low frequencies. And as I turn it up, might be. It says at 200% only high peaks will be used. So I can't hear anything. It might just have cut out the signal.
When they say high peaks, do they mean volume, high volume,
I
or
think it's
high
a
frequency?
signal. I think it's a signal cutoff. It's like clipping it when it's low, and it's like hardly getting anything when it's high.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a good clarification. Okay. So, yes, it actually I misunderstood that. I thought I was referring to frequency, but it's referring to amplitude. So the higher peaks will be applied to the carrier signal, but as I turn this up, it's sort of like softer sounds.
Like a gate?
I guess so. And there's this. Hello, test. There is a gate over here where if I'm softer than a particular signal, it will not come in. So if I'm talking really softly, you won't hear me. But if I'm actually talking above this level, you'll be able to hear me. I mean, from a characteristic standpoint, it sounds like, yeah, it sort of sounds like it's clipping at these lower frequencies, but there's also, I mean, it's hard for me to tell exactly what's going on. Hello, test, 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 test. Let me turn off the gate so we can hear everything. Hello, test. It seems, I mean, I like the sound. Hello, test, 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 test. It seems as though it's like it almost, yeah. It seems like, to me, it seems like it's almost applying these. It's the amount of level that this is applying to the carrier. So it's like if you want to overemphasize this particular shape on the carrier, that's what it seems like it's doing to me. So it's like really overemphasizing these particular shapes.
Kind of like a compressor then?
Yeah, I guess you could consider it like that. Not 100% sure, but I guess that's what it seems like it's doing. It seems like it's transferring these characteristics more when you have this up. And that's different from like dry wet, because it's like when you turn this all the way clockwise, you're not going to hear me. The only reason you're hearing me right now is because I'm monitoring on this track right here. But so anyway, I'll leave this at 100. Hello, test, test. Maybe I'll turn this up a little bit. So, one thing that's also interesting about this is the formant. The formant, as I turn this to the right, I start emphasizing, it's basically shifting all of these frequencies up and down. So now my voice sounds a little higher. Now my voice sounds a little lower. Or I have a deeper kind of quality to my voice. to show you regarding this, which is kind of cool. Let me actually take a simple sound, like let me go into. Let me just open up Operator, and I will just create a simple.
So we're only hearing you through your microphone, so you're very quiet.
Oh, okay. Let me.
Zoom audio for the time being. Okay. So I'm going to go to Operator really quickly. I'm just going to create a really simple thing. So just play it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, it's kind of interesting. I'm going to go to the EQ section. I'm going to go to Audio Effects, and I'm going to go to EQ 8. And when you go to Format, there are actually all of these different vowel shapes. So what's interesting about these particular filters, it's like vocoder, what the vocoder is doing, like look what happens when I take this EQ 8 Format singing A preset and I apply it to the Operator. I'm not here. I think the sound itself is not a good candidate. Let me choose another sound like that vocoder brass, for instance, because there's no frequencies to be filtered. What I'm trying to do is filter frequencies, and there's not enough frequencies in the sound to be filtered to make this vowel. So let me actually go to this preset that I used for. Okay, I'll put this on here instead. So now I'm going to turn this off. So that sounds a little bit like E. Right? You can see how these are taking on the characters of these particular vowels. As I change, it sounds like an ooh, right? So it's very interesting how you can get all of these different sounds, right? Just by changing the shape of the filter. So these are like format shapes, I think. So what's interesting about this is that a vocoder is basically like morphing this kind of shape in real time. And it's applying this like filter shape, like it's basically applying the filtering of your, like basically the characteristics of your voice, and it's filtering the other sound in accordance to your voice. And you know, you can individually get these sounds by just creating them and drawing them in an EQ. And so there are these different presets for these different formats, which is pretty interesting. Now, so let me actually just go back and really quickly. And I'm not sure if it's worth creating this whole thing in real time, but maybe it is. So maybe I'll just do this one more time from scratch. I'll just create the vocoder. So for one, it's nice to have some sort of rich sound as the carrier signal, like a brass sound, which has a lot of harmonics. So what I used is I used this particular preset, this vocoder brass preset. I dragged it on here, and I used it as my carrier signal. So let me just rename this old vocoder. Right. So I've got this vocoder brass, and I'll just rename this like brass carrier. Okay. So this is the signal that's going to be modulated by my voice. Okay. So I've got it just like a MIDI track here. It could be, yeah. So what I'm going to do now, in fact, it doesn't have to be a MIDI track, but well, no, it's useful for this to be a MIDI track for now. What I'm going to do now is I've got this little brass carrier. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create an audio track now. And that audio track will be kind of the vocoder itself. kind of the modulator. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an audio effect. I'm going to grab the vocoder, drop it onto this audio track. And then what I have to do is I have to link this track with this track. And in order to link these two tracks, you basically open up the sidechain input on the vocoder track, and you use basically from the carrier, you basically select external source for the carrier. And then you use the modulator, sorry, you use what we just created as the carrier, the track we just called brass carrier. We use that as the carrier, right? And that's most of the way there, actually. The other thing you have to do is make sure that your audio input is, for this particular track, is set to your voice. So on your computer, it's probably defaulted that way, but right now, for instance, it is on my end. You can actually see some signal coming into this channel. But it's not actually coming through. The monitoring's off, so I have to turn on auto or in to actually hear anything. And so at this point, I actually see my voice on this vocoder. And at this point, my MIDI is my other carrier signals linked to this modulation track. So the last step we have to do is we have to make sure that basically this track is being heard. So we can set monitoring to in, for instance, or we can arm the track for recording. And we also have to arm this track for recording, or we could set the monitoring to in, right? Now, basically, what will happen, hello, now you can actually hear me, but there's a problem here. When I'm playing down chords, I'm actually playing a chord on my keyboard. And as I'm playing my chord on my keyboard, I'm actually superimposing this, my voice on top of it, but there's a problem. The problem is I'm hearing the synthesizer twice. I'm hearing the synthesizer modulated by the vocoder, and I'm also hearing the synthesizer by itself. So what you have to do is you have to turn off the track of just the synthesizer. Like you basically turn off the track. And that basically allows you, now I'm playing, well, I have to turn this back on. Now I'm playing my synthesizer and I'm not hearing the other track anymore. I'm hearing the synthesizer only as it's modulated by the vocoder. But the original synthesizer, you look at right here, it's grayed out. It's actually playing, but we're muting it, right? Because we don't want to hear it twice. We don't want to hear it raw. We want to hear it basically as a side chain. We want to hear it modulated, right? So that's basically all the steps for how to create this. As I said, there's a template for how to use this. The important thing that I'll add to this template is, I'll probably set this monitoring to in, just so that all you have to do really when you're recording is just, well, okay. Here's a reason why you would want to arm this track as well. This is really important, actually. So if you want to record, let's say we want to record something. Setting the monitoring to in is not sufficient. We want to actually arm this track for recording. So let's try this out, okay? I'm going to actually try to record this now. So I'm going to arm both of these tracks, and I'm going to press record. Test. Hello. Test. Hi. Yes. I am a robot. Indeed, it's true. Yes. You can probably hear me okay? I don't care if you do. All right, those are my attempts at freestyling some lyrics. But anyway, here we go. We have these particular, you have everything recorded. And what's important about actually arming this brass carrier track is that if I didn't arm this and I wanted to play this back, the vocoder track would have nothing to reference when it's trying to apply modulation to, right? So the fact that I actually recorded the MIDI means that I can actually indeed
Test. Hello. Test. Hi. Yes. I am a robot. Indeed, it's true.
Right? I can use the MIDI that I've recorded, and in fact I can tweak the MIDI, and I could change the MIDI around, and I could use the same vocal track that I had, and I could change the MIDI dramatically. So it doesn't really matter. you know, I could like re-record this and I could just record the MIDI this time.
Test. Hello. Test. Hi. Yes. I'm a robot. Indeed. Yes. You probably hear me okay.
Right?
Test. Hello. Test. Hi. Yes. I'm a robot. Indeed.
Right? So you're not limited. Like basically, at the end of the day, when you're recording, it's just important that this modulation track is linked to this carrier track. So I actually, I will say this. I you know, at the very beginning of class, I said like, oh, just leave it on input monitoring. That's not going to work actually. If you're recording, if you're doing something live, that'll work just fine. But if you're actually recording, you have to leave this on. You have to leave this recording. Now, it's a little annoying to actually have to enable both of these tracks. That's true. But what's cool is Ableton 11 actually lets you link two tracks together. So if you, on Ableton 11, you could link these two tracks. If you press this button and you link it correctly, this track will also arm for recording. So Ableton finally caught up in that regard. Many other softwares could already do that. But anyway, that's just, if you're interested in Live 11, unfortunately, there's no mysterious link for it as far as I know as of yet, but who knows? Maybe one day. So anyway, hopefully, do you have any questions? Of course, I could talk more about this, but it's, oh yeah, I guess I will say one thing. You're not limited to using the vocal track. So now check this out. I can actually take, I could take any audio I want. So for instance, I could take this drum loop and check this out. I'm going to take this drum loop, I'm going to put it over here and check this out. 1 second. I'm going to turn up the release on the vocoder. Right, so you can get these kind of percussive sounds as well. You turn up the gate so only like certain. So it's pretty cool. You're not limited to the voice. It's kind of a drum coder now. But anyway, it's pretty cool what you can do with this. It ties together a lot of concepts from side chaining to monitoring correctly to to using audio tracks and MIDI tracks. It's a headache, and every time I do it, I always mess up. And I've done it many times now, and I still always do. So it's just a good mental exercise. It's like a math problem. But once you figure it out, you'll figure it out. And what I do when I'm not teaching is teaching is great because it forces you to kind of clarify things in your mind. But if you just want to cheat, like honestly, what I do a lot is if I don't want to think about it, I'll just I'll take this template that I've made and I'll put it in my user library. And the user library is cool. You can just store little presets. So for instance, on my user library, I have these little presets that I've made, and I have this vocoder chain. And it's as simple as taking, what I would do if I were you is I would take both of those tracks, the modulator and the carrier, and press Command G to group the tracks. Okay, I'll do that one more time. I'll select both tracks, group the track, rename the track, and now it's kind of my vocoder. And then what I can do is I can just take this, go to the user library section, and just drag it in there. And now I've got my vocoder right here. So if I ever want to use it again, I don't have to finagle with figuring all this stuff out. Even though it's a good mental exercise, I can just drag this into my project. And there we go. Whoa, wait a second. It might be because I already have one there. Let's see. I swear I just did this yesterday. Oh, there we go. Okay, you just have to drag it to the correct spot. It's pretty handy. I do like that workflow. Anyway, without further ado, there's more stuff I want to talk about. So I'm going to switch gears here, unless you guys have any questions. But okay, So in terms of mixing, don't save vocoder template. I know I mentioned something about EQ, and I downloaded this track from the internet. There's this really interesting website that allows you to basically, I think it's called Cambridge MT Mixing Tracks, Cambridge MT or something, okay? There's a huge multi-track library. This is really handy because it's got all of these mixes to practice from. And so it's also stuff that you could use to sample, but it tells you the number of tracks. See, for instance, when I teach recording, this is handy because a lot of students are really interested in mixing and doing tasks like that. So this is really great. This website's also really awesome from the standpoint it has a bunch of videos, and it coincides with a book that the author also wrote. And basically, a lot of the book is available online for free through the videos that he's released. So it's pretty awesome. So what I did is I just downloaded one of the tracks, and it's got a ton of tracks. And I guess I'll just give you a little bit of an idea for there's so much to say about it, but I'll just give you a little bit of a kernel of some ideas just to think about. One of the things about EQing, let me actually show you a cool plugin that I use. This is kind of a luxurious plugin. It's not that expensive. If you're interested, let me know. I could let you know more about it and some interesting ways to save some money. I bought this plugin. It's really, really a great plugin. What's really nice about this EQ is that it actually describes qualities of certain frequency regions. So like a lot of mixing engineers will throw around words. They'll be like, oh, it sounds tinny, or it sounds boomy, or it sounds, I need more rumble or sub bass, or it needs more air, right? The issue is, and at least for me, is that I always forget the numbers. Like they're like, oh yeah, like just do a boost at 250 hertz. Like my mind hasn't assimilated that information yet. And I need to just make flashcards for that. But what's nice about this is it actually overlays the regions of the particular frequency characteristics on top of the EQ. So you don't have to remember the numbers. But what's also great is you don't need this plugin. A lot of websites, like the website where this came from, has all these stats like in a chart. It's like boost 100. Like you see how down here it says boost 100 to 170 for more punch, boost 130 to 220 to add warmth and fullness. Essentially, when you're learning how to EQ, you could use your ears just by messing around with stuff. But it's also, I think it's helpful to like use charts like this to kind of determine what you're listening to, just to like understand what it means to like add more boom or add more honk or add more air. Just to add an added association to those particular regions. So I like this EQ, but you by no means have to use this EQ. I'll show you the website where this came from. This is a cool website. It's abletunes.com. And what's nice about it is it has a bunch of other Ableton templates too. And I think if I go to Abletunes EQ chart, there's an EQ cheat sheet for over 20 instruments. And it basically tells you like in the different frequency ranges what you're expecting to hear. For different regions. So that's another cool thing about this. Like if you go to the drop down, you can actually select like, oh, for an 808 bass drum, this is like the characteristics that you'd expect. It's not a classic preset in the standard sense. For instance, I'll show you what I mean. If you're looking at EQ presets, if you go to EQ8 and you go to like drums and like you drag in a preset, if you drag in a preset for this particular track, it actually draws in like a shape, right? It actually says, oh, if you want to EQ a cymbal, you do this. Or if you want to EQ a floor tom, you do this. Or if you want to EQ a kick, you do this. These are really helpful, right? But it doesn't tell you why you do this. Whereas charts, or this plugin right here, this tells you why you would do this. It actually doesn't do anything at all. All it does is it overlays specific characteristics that you'd expect to hear, And then you're like, oh, like what would happen if I lowered this? Well, I guess I would get some more, I would lose some body and smack. So like charts like this exist on the internet. This is just a nice interface for a chart. But here's something to think about when you're EQing. So let's just look at these vocals first for a second, okay? And by the way, when I EQ, I can't really do it in real time, or it's something that I have to like let it breathe. So like just take what I'm doing with a grain of salt. Like I would sit with it more and kind of contemplate what I want to do. So let me actually.
Can I ask a question?
Oh yeah.
Sorry, I mean this is really basic, but for some people. But like, what are you doing when you're EQing? What is EQing?
Okay, yeah, that's a great point. So when I'm EQing, basically what I'm doing is I'm raising and lowering the levels of certain frequencies. It's like, you remember when we were studying filtering? What we're doing when we're EQing, this is just another filter. You know, you could EQ using this filter. You could EQ using this filter, right? When we're EQing, when we're equalizing, we're basically selecting the frequencies that we want to filter out of the sound, or the sounds that we want to boost in the sound. And so filtering accomplishes that. So EQ and filtering are basically very, you need a filter to accomplish the task of EQing. However, filtering can do much more than just equalization. So essentially, when you're looking through these different EQ presets, you're basically examining all of the different cuts and boosts that are being applied to particular regions of the frequency spectrum. So if you recall, this middle line right here means that there's no, basically there's no equalization applied at all, right? And this is basically how this graph looked like at the beginning, right? There's no equalization. The x-axis is the different frequencies. These are the higher frequencies. These are the lower frequencies, right? High and low. And then the y-axis is loudness. So louder sounds, softer sounds. So what's happening is basically we are choosing certain frequencies to be louder or softer. So right here, this little frequency band right here is being made softer, right? Because this is the baseline. This 0 is the baseline, right? This is with no changes in loudness to that particular frequency. So I've made this particular frequency softer by 12 decibels, okay? Whereas up here, I've actually made the sound louder by 6 decibels, right? I've made 10,000 hertz, the frequency that's 10,000 hertz, louder by 6 decibels. And then whereas the frequency at 1,000 hertz has been made neither louder nor softer, right? It's exactly the same volume as it was when it came in to the filter. So that's all interesting, right? So that's what equalization, it allows you to sculpt the sound. So there's really two types of equalization that people apply. One is this, sometimes people, I guess I should say this, sometimes people stage their equalization. So what some people do, and it's, you know, different strokes for different folks. So everyone does it slightly differently. But let me just isolate a specific section of the song. I don't remember how this sounds. I just pulled it up. Okay, this is just something I found on the internet.
To keep my fire gone. If we don't, then we'll be expiring soon. And we're riding with the flow.
Okay, I wonder if there's any singing in here.
Through the window.
Okay, it's highly processed. I either get rap or I get highly processed. I wish there's something in the middle. We can work with rap. Let's work with rap. Okay. So let's check this out. Yeah, there's definitely a lot you can EQ with rap as well. At least, yeah, it's what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the sound prettier. We're not trying to like add sound. We're not trying to add notes to it by equalization, right? We're just trying to make the sound sound better. So I'm going to drag this EQ in fact, I'm going to drag two EQs on there. I'm going to drag my handy dandy EQWise plugin. And I'm going to overlay, I'm going to use a chart, vocals, okay? And let's just listen for these particular characteristics, right? And so let's just hear this particular section.
Low but the inspo, low but the inspo, now you're breaking out through the window. Low but the inspo.
So I want to try to find something where it's not like breaking up in the middle.
If we don't, then we'll be expiring soon. And we're riding with the flow, but the inspo, now you're breaking out through the window. Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team, taking dreams out.
So
one step at this time, gotta stay strong. And now we're staying rested on this marathon.
So notice what happens is I lower.
Gotta keep my
if I cut out, basically, if I do a low cut and I do it too extremely,
but the inspo, now you're breaking out through the window.
I'm gonna lose all the sound. But it's actually beneficial to lower. I guess one thing to do that's a pretty smart thing to do for most instruments that aren't bass is to cut out the low frequencies. It's amazing. Like, this is one of my favorite pieces of advice. It really makes a difference. Like, you don't really hear the low frequencies. Like, we don't hear these sub frequencies very well, but we feel them. And when you start adding them and you start layering them over and over and over on, like, if you have like 7 tracks where you have a lot of low frequency rumble, like just like looking at this EQ.
Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team, taking.
You can see there's stuff there, right? And you might think, well, it's just a little bit. But then if you add it, like if you add the low end rumble of the other track and you add the low end rumble of the other track, it adds up. So one of the best things that I'd recommend you do is to lower, is basically to EQ out low frequencies on instruments that don't need the low frequencies for the song. Basically, for instruments where the low frequencies aren't like important for the particular sound. Like for the voice, you don't need these sub frequencies. They're not extraneous. Like the fundamental of a singer is probably around 80, 60, anywhere from 60 to 80 onwards, right? So we don't need these kind of sounds that are below this particular threshold. We can kind of filter them out.
Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team, taking.
And you can make it steeper, or you can make this an even steeper slope.
Been a bit quiet in the scene now.
You might not even hear the difference. By the way, EQing is very subtle. You might not hear the difference until you add it all together in the context of the mix. But so this is one thing you can do. This is one thing I recommend everyone does. For home studios, from like somewhere around 500 hertz or in that region, there's this boxiness that sometimes occurs as a result of like the room that you record in. There are certain standing waves that result as a result of the acoustic design of the room. Especially smaller rooms are susceptible to this. So, and since people are recording at home, this is like another practical thing I can tell you, is that in this particular range, there's often some mud. So if I emphasize it, you'll hear a little more. I don't know where this guy recorded this track, but.
Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my.
If you emphasize it, you can realize you don't like the sound, probably. It sounds too much, right?
Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team, taking dreams out. One step at this time, gotta stay strong. And now we're staying rested on this marathon.
You want to be careful. If you take away too much, it'll sound less full.
Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team, taking dreams out. One step at this time, gotta stay strong. And now we're staying rested on this marathon.
Right? So you might see curves like this, but I would highly recommend you refer to some equalization charts to kind of understand just to give you a better understanding of what you're expecting to hear by making tweaks in certain regions, because this is very subtle stuff, and there's a certain ear for it that needs to be cultivated. And everyone has their own journey in this particular regard. You could just do everything by ear, but there's something to be gained by thinking about the theoretical classifications for these particular frequency bands. Let's just raise up the honkiness and nasality.
Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team, taking James out. One step at this time, gotta stay strong. And now we're staying rested on this marathon. Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team, taking.
So it's interesting. They're saying boosting these frequencies can help some singers' lyrics be more intelligible. But if you want to remove some boxiness.
Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team, taking James out. One step at this time, gotta stay strong. And now we're staying rested on this.
Right? So I mean, these are things I would have to sit and think about and play around and actually play them in the context of my track. It's in this, not my track, in the context of this track itself. There's, you know, you can have an entire, there are semesters of courses on this particular subject. Like I'd recommend you also, I mean, I guess this is the last day of class. So I'd recommend you also take 174 with King or Tom Erb, depending on who's teaching it. It's a whole year-long series of basically audio production, mixing, mastering, that whole game. So it's, but this is just, these are just some basic principles to kind of get you started. So airiness, this is something I always kind of hear as very dramatic, to lift up these higher frequencies just to give it more sheen.
Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team, taking James out. One step at this time, gotta stay strong. And now we're staying rested on this marathon. Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team, taking James out. One step at this time, gotta stay strong. And now we're staying rested on this marathon.
It adds, but you have to be careful because the sibilants, like, you know, the S sound, the s, those frequencies for the S, like, is around 5, somewhere, if I remember correctly, somewhere between 5 and 6,000 hertz. So if you boost this frequency right here, you're going to start hearing a lot of S.
Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team, taking James out.
So that's something to guard against. Like, for part of me really likes this. It sounds very beautiful. It's like, I get this like airiness to the sound. I just like that sound. It's a subjective thing, but I like it. But you have to be careful because you can inadvertently add a lot of s in there if you're not careful. Another thing that people do is they EQ in stages. This is something I was starting to explain earlier. They'll have two EQs. They'll have one EQ where they subtract things, and they'll have one EQ where they boost things. So I'll show you an example. I'll just take the EQ8 for example on this. So you might find, let me turn these devices off. You might find that there's certain really annoying resonant frequencies. And this is controversial, but a lot of people do this. So it's worth knowing about. I guess nothing isn't controversial. Let's see.
Been a bit quiet in the scene now.
So what you could do, just to really, really try to exaggerate what frequencies you want to hear, are to go here and to basically change, well, you want to be on a bell curve, that's correct. Change the Q quality factor to be really narrow. Who did it? Oh, I did it right. Okay, good.
Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team, taking James out. One step at this time, gotta stay. Been a bit quiet in the.
You can actually solo a particular region.
Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team.
Like that particular resonance might bother you.
Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team. Taking James out. One step at this time, gotta stay strong.
And you can't really hear it until you boost it. So you might want to just go in and like make a cut. So some people, like, they notch out certain frequencies. They like go through and they surgically like listen. They like boost certain frequencies. And this happens to me sometimes. Like I'll find myself doing this sometimes when there's just like this obnoxious resonance in the sound, and it's kind of clouding up the mix. So what I'll do is, it's not always appropriate because you have to be careful when you're doing this, but there are certain situations when this works. So you might go through and you might surgically remove certain resonances.
Been a bit quiet in the.
And you might have like many of these, right? And then after the fact, you might add another EQ where you just kind of add some boosts. You're like, okay, now that I've gotten rid of the frequencies I don't want, let me boost the frequencies I do want.
Been a bit quiet in the scene now. Working with my team, taking James out.
Right? So there's sort of this two-stage process that many people work by. They have like this subtractive section where you're subtracting frequencies, and then you have this additive section. I mean, this is both filtering, but in one sense you're adding frequencies, and then you have, in one sense, you're kind of subtracting frequencies. And you know, or in some ways you're partitioning the work. So you might have this be like more narrow stuff. This might be more broad. Like you might have a broad low cut. It might work for you in that regard, because like it might just be really cluttered to have all these bands open. Even if you expand it, it still might be a little bit, it might be a little bit restrictive. So that's something that is often done. And here's another rule of thumb. When you're making cuts, people often, except for like the low cut, when you're making cuts, people often do more dramatic, like sharper cues. These aren't hard and fast rules, but as a general rule of thumb, a lot of people do steeper, sharper cuts for basically narrower cuts. And then for boosts, people often do broader boosts. So like, for instance, they might do something like this, right? Instead of doing something like that, they might do something a little more gradual. And let me actually show you a bandpass filter, for example. They might, instead of doing something like that, they might do something like that. So again, these are just guidelines. They're not hard and fast. But if you're trying to mix a song, there are good things to know. Another thing that a lot of people do in tracks is that they'll often mix and master in the same exact environment. So mixing, historically, people would mix all their tracks to such a level where basically on this master fader, you would see like, if I play this track right now, it's going to be super loud. Let me.
Been a big wide in the say now. Working with my team, taking dreams out. One step at this time, gotta stay strong. And always stay rested on this.
So when you're mixing, a lot of people will actually, a lot of people, like if you're a mixing engineer and you're not mastering your track, I guess it's important to know the distinction. When you're mixing your track, there's this idea that you're leaving some headroom in the track, right? There's a lot of tracks here, and I haven't calibrated my faders yet, but if I did, this would be really awesome because I can just move my faders on my desk and I could adjust all these, so I have to kind of manually do this. It takes time, but what you would do if you're trying to mix this particular track is you would lower the volumes little by little. I guess I can, it's going to take a while, but it's helpful to, if you have this many tracks in your session, it's helpful to group things together. Like there's 7 different kicks here. That's a lot of kicks. So it's helpful to take these 7 kicks, group them, and then call it kicks. So I got all my kicks, right? It might be useful to take these snares, group them, Command G, call it snares. I had 36 tracks to begin with. That was a little obnoxious in terms of the amount of mixing. In terms of leveling that I'd have to do. There's nothing wrong with that. Artists like Jacob Collier, they have like 1,000 tracks. I'm not even an exaggeration. But in order, I actually met Jacob Collier, and I asked him. I said, how do you get around mixing 1,000 tracks on your sessions? Like, first of all, how does your computer not explode? But how do you get around that? And he told me that basically he uses buses. And what a bus is, it's basically you're grouping tracks that are similar. Like you're basically selecting all of these kicks. You basically group them all together, and now you've got all these kicks. And instead of actually having to manually adjust the volume for all of these kicks, you can set the relative levels once, and then you could just basically set the level for all the kicks at the same time. So for instance, let's just listen to the kicks. Okay. Let's go to a section where there's lots of kicks. You can see a lot of kicks. In my life, I've never seen a track with 7 kicks. I think even Jacob Collier. No, I know. I bet you Jacob Collier has done 7 kicks. But This is kind of this is very interesting. It's also interesting to look at other projects to see what people have done. So now my curiosity is piqued, and I might try to do something like this to get a really fat sound. But what's interesting is I can hear all these kicks together, and I could lower the volume of all these kicks together. Right? Right? Because ultimately, although all these kicks are making unique sounds, we're hearing them all as one sound. Ultimately, this is a sound design technique to kind of create one really gigantic kick sound. So the result is, when we're trying to mix this against the other instruments, we don't need to mix all of these tracks individually. We can just mix all of the kicks together, right? So you got the snares right here. Okay, hi-hats. I'm just grouping together similar instruments. Okay, so I've got all these cymbals. I'm going to group all the cymbals together. Okay, just something I'm trying out. This might be the wrong way to group things, but I'm just trying it out anyway. I'll group my organs together. Bunch of strings. Okay, synths, okay, there's a bunch of synths. I don't know if these synths are all playing the same lines. So it might be the case that these synths are all playing different parts, which they probably are. So I probably don't want to group these together. I do from one standpoint. I might want to group them together, but I also want the capability to mix them separately. So I'll leave these synths the way they are. There's a lot of stuff here. So ultimately, if I were mixing this, I'm not going to be able to mix this in time before the end of class, unfortunately, but hopefully the process is illuminating. There's this idea, there's a loudness war. This is a pejorative term that, well, this is not a pejorative term. This is a concept that reflects on the negative aspect of trying to make everything louder and louder and louder. Like music over time has become louder and louder and louder. And there's many ways that has manifested. One of the ways that's manifested is that tracks on average have become louder. Like the average loudness of a track has become higher. There's less dynamic range in a track. So like if you listen to a radio song today, like the waveforms look like sausages. They're completely like even. Like if I looked at a Skrillex waveform, like I had one, it was just completely homogeneous. Like there was no kind of, there was very little variation, which is great when you're driving in a car and you don't want to actually, you want the volume to be relatively consistent. But if you listen to like music from like the 50s or the 40s, there were spots in the song where the music was softer and then the music was louder, right? And there's this psychoacoustic, there's this kind of psychological thing that we experience where if we hear something that's louder, we automatically like it more. It's a psychological phenomenon. So if you play two tracks that are identical and you just raise the volume of one of them, you're gonna like the louder one because like it just like massages your ears and it just feels nice. So we don't want to trick ourselves into doing that. So it takes some restraint. This is all to say that some people, they erroneously, in order to make their track louder, they like boost everything, which isn't like a good habit. A better habit would be to lower the volume of everything. Like let's say your kick is too loud relative to the snare. The thing to do isn't to make your snare louder. The thing to do is to make your kick softer in general, right? That actually saves you some valuable, precious dynamic headroom, right? If you make your kick louder, that's just gonna make the master track louder. And then like you can see that this is orange. This is not good. This track is too loud right now, okay? That's way too loud, right? We don't want that. I'm gonna lower this. I have to click this to reset it. That's better, right? It's still a little loud, right? But when we hear everything together, when you're mixing, you want the value around here to be -6 or so, okay? When you're mastering, you want this value to be really close to 0, like -0.8. You don't want it to be above -0.8. So, because you might be wondering, like how loud am I supposed to make my track? Like, can I just keep moving this up? Like what is a good level to make my tracks? A rule of thumb, most people mix and master now together in one box. It's as I said, it's a controversial thing, just like everything in every single discipline of life, actually. But the advantage to mixing and mastering in the same box is that you get to make your decisions and you can change stuff around. If you're indecisive, if you're eternally indecisive like me, you could change your decision. You could change how your mixing worked while you're mastering. You could change your mastering while you're mixing. It just leaves you more options. In the past, what people would do is they would set this up. They would set up the levels of all their tracks. It'd basically be like, the name of the game is moving these faders little by little until the value, until it, 1, sounds good. 2, if you're sending this out to a mastering engineer, you get it so that the levels are around -6 down here. And then the mastering engineer would take the music and then they would boost the value of the song so that it's like closer to 0, right? But if you're doing everything in Ableton, like if you're probably not going to have a mastering engineer, you're probably going to do it yourself. What you'd want to do is you'd want to set all these levels so that they sound good relative to each other. Like you don't want the kick to sound too much louder than the snare. And then you want to adjust this. You could either adjust it by adjusting the fader. You can totally do that today. So that the value is around -0.8. That's what you want to shoot for. And there are ways you can cheat to get you there, right? There are ways you can cheat to get you there, but ultimately, like for instance, if you compress the track, you can get there quicker, but you're gonna, there's a lot to say, and I don't think I can tie the bow on this in 8 minutes, unfortunately, but it's important to get the relative, I guess what I'll say is it's important to get the relative levels of your track first and for them to be natural sounding and them to not be too processed by compressors and limiters and all of that before it gets into the master channel. At least that's my perspective. You can compress, I have to back up, sorry. Too many thoughts are going through my head right now. What I meant to say is there's this thing called a limiter. Let me just put a limiter on this track. This thing is called a limiter. And what a limiter is, I think I talked to you about this before. It's basically like if you have a compressor, gosh, how do we synthesize every single thing I haven't told you about Ableton in 8 minutes? That's a challenge. Okay, if we have a compressor, right, and you change the ratio to be really, really, really high, that basically will mean that anything that comes above a certain level will be compressed, right? Will be completely, like, basically nothing louder. Nothing can be louder than this threshold, right? As a result of that, it's basically limiting the signal at that level. Like nothing can be louder than that, and it's ensuring that nothing will ever be louder than that. So what a limiter can do is a limiter is just a compressor, but it also has basically automatic makeup gain built in. And it's a compressor that has a really, really high ratio. So if I turn on the limiter and I basically set the ceiling to negative, here's what I mean. If I set the ceiling, remember how I said you don't want to be louder than -0.8? If I set this ceiling to -0.8, I turn up the gain, it'll push this thing to -0.8. But notice what happens as I keep increasing the gain. If the signal's too loud before it comes to the limiter, note it, like I'm just simulating what it's like for a signal to be super loud before it comes into the limiter. it starts to sound really distorted and bad. So here's the scenario. You mix your track incredibly badly. Like the levels aren't set correctly and all this stuff. Things aren't set correctly. And you're like, I'm just going to fix it by throwing a limiter on there. You just throw a limiter on there. And you just, everything's too loud and everything's too hot. And this, you're like, oh, I just have to pull it down to negative 0.8 and everything should be fine, right? It's like, it's at like, let's say it's at like a 10 and you're like, oh, I got to bring this down like 15 decibels. This is not the way to do it. Because what you're doing is you're basically completely losing all of the dynamic range and it just sounds really super ultra compressed. So I guess what I'll say is try to get the levels here good first before you actually throw any kind of maximizer or limiter or anything on your master bus, on your master track, right? Get the levels relatively good here first, get them sounding nice. See if you can actually get the levels here sounding good enough where the levels are naturally like negative 0.8 here without throwing any limiter on, right? Then you've actually done a really good job mixing it, okay? Then if you want some more juice, if you want like the track to sound a little more compressed and you want it, if you want to squash the waveform just a little bit, just to kind of make it a little bit more loud, make it feel more loud on average, you could raise the gain and you could kind of push the level of the sound a little bit. But yeah, there's a quotation that my teacher told me. He said, limiters limit. And he said that in a way that, like, basically in a pejorative sense. Like, if you throw a limiter on a track that's mixed poorly, it's not going to fix the fact that the track is mixed poorly. It's just going to make everything sound compressed, and it's going to make it sound bad in another way. So you want to get your levels relatively good. Use your ears. Use your ears to get your levels relatively good, and then peer at the meter. And remember, subtract, not add, if you can. When possible, subtract, not add, right? If this is too loud relative to this, lower the volume of the thing that's too loud. Don't raise the volume of the thing that's too soft. Gosh, I wanted to talk about session view, but I don't think we have time for that. So any questions about any of this? I'm sure there's a ton. Okay, so in that case, I'm just gonna leave it literally any question at all about anything about Ableton, anything, any device that you're curious about. Okay, I'll quickly show you session view, really quickly. Okay, race for time. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna switch to this view called session view. And what session view allows you to do is it allows you to play things non-chronologically. So for instance, let me just populate these particular tracks with a bunch of clips. I'm just going to arbitrarily take some clips here, and I'm going to drag them on there. I'm going to drag this clip here. I'm going to take this clip over here, and I'm going to take this clip, I'm going to put it over here. I'm going to take this clip, I'm going to drag it over here. I'm going to take this clip, I'm going to drag it over here. Sorry, I'm 2 times speed right now. Take this clip, put it over here, right? Now what I can do is I can play this clip. I can jump to this clip, jump to this clip, jump to this clip. Jump to this clip. Let me show you another example. I'm going to open up this particular track that I think might be cool to show you. And if I look up, it's kind of a dubstep-y track. Okay. I'm missing the gate there. That's fine. I'll try this one. Don't save. Now, if I have a particular track, let's say I'm playing something live, right? If I'm playing live, up till now we've sequenced everything chronologically. But if I'm on a set and I want to actually play something non-chronologically, Ableton allows you to do this using this view called session view. And what's really cool about it is that it's pretty simple for this to occur. So for instance, I have all these clips. These same clips that are in arrangement view are presented in session view, like some of them. So for instance, if I, like this track right here, like if I want to sequence a particular passage, right? If I want to start the track with just the drums, let me just delete all this stuff really quickly. I'm going to delete everything in session view. Let's say I want to start out with a little bit of drums. Like I want to just open up my track with some drums. What I can do is I can go to I can drag drums, I can drag the drum clip, I can copy it. And notice how all of these little columns are tracks. These columns are the same tracks that these tracks are, except they're in rows in arrangement view. So I took that clip and I'm going to drag it into a particular slot. And now if I play this clip, whoops, I have to be in session view. I have to click this button to just be in session view. Wait a second. I've got this drum pattern right here. Let me add in this bass line. So maybe it starts out with this drum pattern, and then over here, I've got this bass line. So I start out with the drum pattern, and then maybe I'm like playing along to it, and then all of a sudden I click this. Whoops, that's the wrong. All of a sudden, I've got drums, now I've got drums and bass. And then maybe all of a sudden, I want to ramp it up. And there's a particular part in the set where I want to, I'm going to select this region right here. Okay, so I'm going to select this particular region, and I can even consolidate time to new scene. I could do that. And now I'm here. Start with the bass here. I can go on to the next clip right here. Oh, there's so much more I want to say about this, but I think we are out of time. There's so many cool things you can do with this. You could sequence things, like for instance, you could actually sequence. You could cause particular clips to cause you could cause particular clips to jump to other clips. So you could have a sequence like this. This is the last thing I'll show you. You could have something like this, which is pretty cool. Delete all this stuff. I'm going really fast, I know. Just hopefully this will give you some creative idea that you can potentially use in your other tracks. Give you something to look up later. Okay. So I've got these particular things, right? So I click one, right? What I can do, if I click the launch button right here, the launch box, what I can do is I can basically, I'll just show you this and you can figure out how to do it later, but you can select these clips and you could set them to jump to each other. So for instance, I could do something like this. Wait a second. It's going to jump to any. So you can get all these interesting generative textures, right? I remember I showed this to a student in 173, and this was really not their aesthetic. They were like, "Wow, I just don't like that." But I don't know. I just love like the generative possibilities that you can generate from something like this, you know? basically, in other words, you can set these clips to jump to other clips. And what you can do on top of that is you can record what's happening. So I could go here and I can actually record these changes. And now what I have is, well, where did I put this? I'm gonna call this, rename, clips. And what I think will happen is if I go right here and I record this, on arrangement view, you actually get all of these particular clips that are actually recorded. And it actually, if I play it back, anyway, I know I didn't give you a thorough explanation of that, but just know that exists and that you could use it if you look up session view. It's just a little teaser. Okay, guys, I would highly recommend you take King Britt's 173 Ableton class. King is really amazing. Yeah, I did make a document that I will share with you guys. Stay on the Discord. I'll put some stuff there if you guys want to ever stay in touch. I do also want to mention, I mentioned this at the beginning of class, but I think Keyshawn wasn't around. Is basically there's going to be this optional final where you can come and you could present some of your work, and there's a Google form link where you can actually get your work kind of performed live. And so if that's something you're interested in doing, is Keyshawn still here?
Yep, right here.
Okay, so maybe, let's see, why don't you explain that really quickly?
For sure. So I started like a live stream thing, I guess like maybe 3 months ago, and I've been bringing on guest musicians from like UCSD and different people that I've met. And I was like, oh, what's one way that I can kind of like, include everyone else that's in this class? Because we have like 100 students. And when I was listening to like all the audio files and all the submissions, I was like, damn, this is really dope. So I wanted to make something like kind of to a little bit like celebrate, but also kind of like do something that's not just like, oh, just submit your final and you're done with the school year. The quarter. So I wanted to make this live stream available for everyone. And then I was like, hey, Nakul, can we do this? And he was like, yep. So I was like, all right, let's do it. So there's a Google form, and then it's going to be on like Wednesday the 16th at 11:30, which is like the actual final slot that we have kind of slotted into our web regis. And then we'll just send in all the other details afterwards. But if you guys want to sign up, please join us. And then I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Fantastic. I'll put that on the OneNote, and I'm really into that idea. And yeah, if you guys want to sign up, it's going to be totally non-judgmental. We'll just listen and we'll enjoy it. You can talk about your track if you want. You don't have to. There's certain things described on the form. I'll send out an email to everyone about this too, because for those who are synchronous, they can also participate, or asynchronous. Yeah. So anyway, if there's no further questions, guys, you've been a wonderful class. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really enjoyed teaching you guys, and I guess full steam ahead. And yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
For real.
If we have
Yeah.
questions, can I ask you?
Yeah, sure.
I had like 1 or 2 questions. Wait, let me try. I don't know if my camera's like, yeah, no, I'm just black right now. But
Actually, sorry, before you jump in, Sean,
yeah.
sorry. Now, cool, Alex took off, so I think we're not having a TA session.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, no problem, no problem. Well, we can. I was thinking we could have one next week or something. We can schedule a time just to talk if we need about grading. But yeah, I guess if we don't end up doing that, I just want to thank you, Chad. You've been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, not a problem. I've loved the course. Anyway, sorry, Sean, go ahead.
No worries. I have like 1 or 2 questions. I just thought to get them out of the way while I have some expertise in front of me. I thought the one instrument that I find hardest to get like audio files for is like horns and brass, and I don't know if you have a cheat to getting stuff like good horn sounds.
That's a really good question. I think have you looked at the Spitfire Labs? I think you'd already known about that.
Spitfire Labs. I think you might have mentioned it, but I have not actually looked at Spitfire Labs. Maybe it flew over my head.
Let me actually share my screen. I'll show you really quickly. It's pretty outstanding because they release a pack every week, and actually they're a really fantastic plugin. The interface is also really beautiful. It's amazing that they released this stuff for free because they also have paid.
I got all the Melda stuff, which has been super fun. But I didn't get this far.
Yeah. This is a good one. So let's see. I've downloaded a bunch of packs. I'll see if there's any brass on the ones that I have. Oh yeah, there are some brass. Bitten Bumblebee. There's always new packs. Some of these are more experimental, but these are just this is a pack called Trumpet Fields, but they release a new pack every single week. So I think there's probably like 100 packs there. So I bet you on the website.
Brass. I think at the top there's another brass one too, but yeah.
Oh really?
Maybe.
Maybe. Oh, bit.
No, I was just never mind.
Some of these are a little more experimental in nature, but yeah, there's definitely possibility. I'll have to do some more research. Brass is one of the more difficult instruments to kind of I found for sounding natural. But if you're playing like sustained notes, it should be okay. But if you're trying to do like a funky sax solo, it's not going to sound realistic, unfortunately.
There's just so much character and like little things about the noise, right? It just makes it hard to.
Absolutely.
Sean, it sounds like you're gonna just have to learn how to play the brass, dude. You just gotta learn how to play it. 5 years later, you'll get it.
I'll just hire someone. I'll make enough money and hire someone. The other two.
No, find a friend. Find a UCSD friend that can play it. They would probably love to collaborate.
Yeah. Don't worry, I'm just kidding. My dad probably could do it too, but it's not like a urgent thing. I was just thinking about it. The other two things is one for the homework. If we don't have like the version of Ableton that has wavetable, are we supposed to like get the trial version, or is there like a different like synth we can use? I mean.
Oh right. Yeah. So there is a synth called Surge. Someone asked the same exact question last time. What version of Ableton do you have?
It's a standard. I got it for free because someone at a different school has like an educational pack, and they just had like 40 different copies of it.
Oh, no kidding. Well, did you ever? Let me see. Let me pause my recording really quickly.
By the way, I'm gonna head out right